Infinites are something that many fighting games have to deal with, and the ways the developers choose to handle them can often have a massive impact on the game as a whole. While some won't touch them at all, the majority of games will at least put something in place to prevent them, with varying levels of success. Most games do a pretty good job at preventing them though. Guilty Gear and Under Night In-Birth, for instance, will reduce the untechable time of a move as a combo goes on. Under Night reduces it further the more times you repeat a move, and Guilty Gear will also increase pushback as the combo continues. The Street Fighter III series, which uses a more link-focused combo system, has a juggle counter in place when the opponent is launched in the air, and will end the combo if the juggle goes on too long. Those super hits will reset it. Each character's kit was also meticulously designed to make sure they didn't have any infinites, and while it wasn't always perfect, by Third Strike they had things down fairly well. So how does JoJo's handle infinite prevention? Like the Street Fighter III series, the game also has a combo system mainly focused on links and special cancels. But instead of a juggle counter, the game takes advantage of two systems: launch scaling, and the infinite prevention system, or IPS for short. The first one's fairly self-explanatory. The more hits in a combo, the lower a move will launch. The second system's a bit more complex, but is there to prevent grounded infinites. And hey, if Third Strike, which came out before Heritage, had developed a functional system for infinite prevention, surely JoJo's would too. Right? But seriously, the infinite prevention system JoJo's uses is horribly flawed for several reasons. But before that, I would like to briefly touch on the specifics of launch scaling for those that might be curious about it. And plus, I think it also serves as a good way to introduce how JoJo's works beneath the surface, in a way that's easier to follow than just going immediately into IPS. Rather than being an equation where the launch height decreases with each successive hit, I think it's easier to view launch scaling in terms of stages, or levels, of which there are 8, from 0 to 7. Stage 7 has the highest launch, and Stage 0 doesn't launch the opponent at all, making it akin to a hard knockdown. Every hit starting with the third will bring the stage down by 1 until it reaches Stage 0 and doesn't launch at all. Let's use Dio's 5C as an example. This move starts out at Stage 7, being the highest launch. If 5C is the first or second hit of a combo, the move will launch at Stage 7. But starting from the third hit, it will go down to Stage 6, then Stage 5, then 4, 3, 2, 1, before finally reaching Stage 0 at the 9th hit, where it will remain for the rest of the combo. But keep in mind that not all moves begin at the same launch stage. All Horse's 5C, for instance, starts at Stage 2, meaning it reaches Stage 0 at only 4 hits of a combo. So what determines what stage a move will launch at? Well, each move in the game, with the exception of a few command and hit grabs, have a set of 48 different attack properties that are read from whenever a move makes contact with the opponent, on hit or on block. These properties cover just about anything pertaining to a move, from damage, stand gauge damage, meter build, and additional attack properties like hard knockdown, launch, or child transformation. We'll come back to this list of attack properties again when talking about IPS, but for now, all we're looking for is the 8th property, since that's the value that determines what stage the move starts at when it launches the opponent. Make sense? I hope so, because now we're going into IPS, which is a bit more complicated. To restate what I mentioned before, IPS is horribly flawed when it comes to infinite prevention, and this is for 2 major reasons. 1, it doesn't always do its job properly when it does activate, and 2, it's inconsistent. So what does IPS do? On activation, the hit stop of an attack is removed, the time where the opponent is frozen in place during hit stun, and the opponent is left to recover as soon as possible. These 2 traits combine together to reduce hit stun as much as possible, and prevent the combo from continuing. The concept and execution are simple enough, but you may have noticed that I only said that it cancels hit stop. And it's important to make that distinction, because that's only a part of hit stun. The recovery animation that plays following hit stop still counts as hit stun, and if you manage to hit the opponent during this time, you can still continue your combo. IPS doesn't run after each hit until the combo's ended. It only happens once with each activation. What this means is that if you have a move that can come out before the opponent finishes their recovery, you can essentially nullify the effects of IPS and continue your combo. Keep in mind, however, that very few moves can beat out IPS. My testing hasn't been super thorough, but it's fast enough to prevent the player from being able to combo 2A if the first one activates IPS. Even Shadow Dio's 5A with its 1-frame startup isn't fast enough. But even still, there are some things that are. The individual hits of Hull Horse's S-Bullet, for instance, are fast enough to hit the opponent before they can fully recover. To demonstrate this, I modified the game to always activate IPS at 9 hits. You can see here in this example that normally, 5B at point blank combos into 236A, B, or C. But when done as the 9th hit here, you'll notice Dio recovers much faster, and the special doesn't combo. This video also has IPS set to activate at the 9th hit, but even when it does, S-Bullet is still too fast and the combo continues. Enough that Hull Horse can even go into unblockable Okizeme and loop you to death if he has the meter. Jotaro's S5A, due to its quick recovery and 1-frame startup, is also fast enough to beat out IPS. I'm sure I could find more examples if I spent more time looking, but this final one using Polnareff's Million Spits should be able to get the point across. Polnareff also has a few other quirks when it comes to IPS, but we'll get back to that later. The main takeaway here is that IPS, even on activation, doesn't necessarily guarantee that the combo will end. And in the case of Polnareff and Hull Horse, the combos shown lead into loopable infinites, unblockable Okizeme loops in Hull Horse's case, meaning it can be nullified by the very thing it's trying to prevent. Granted, that's not to say it never works. The majority of the time I've spent playing this game, IPS activation has done its job and ended the combo. But the bigger problem with IPS isn't how it activates, it's when it activates, which is nothing but inconsistent for both the attacker and the person getting hit. In a game like Skullgirls, infinite prevention is fairly consistent. I don't play Skullgirls, but what I've read and those I've talked to on the matter say that the game relies on a system involving combo stages. The opponent is able to burst if a new chain starts with a button that has already been used, as long as the players reach stage 5 in their combo. While the concept of stages might seem kinda complex at first, what's important is that this system has a consistent structure and clearly indicates when it's active for both the player and the opponent. Whether or not it's a good system is up for debate. I've gotten different opinions from everyone I've asked, but the main point here is that it always follows the same pattern. You know what triggers it, when it'll go off, and when the opponent is able to burst. JoJo's is not like this. IPS in JoJo's is pseudo-random, meaning that while it's not technically random, it's designed to feel like it is. There's a lot of moving parts that go into determining when IPS activates, but I'll do my best to try and explain it all step by step. There are 3 main values that IPS keeps track of. A check to see if the combo will be affected by IPS, a counter keeping track of the number of hits since that check became active, and a third value we'll just call the RNG value, since this is what's responsible for the pseudo-random behavior. The first value isn't enabled automatically with the first hit of a combo. Instead, it depends on the move you use. If you remember the attack properties mentioned earlier, the 37th value determines if a move will enable IPS for the combo. To go off on a bit of a tangent, this is also how scaling works, which is why some combos like Polnareff's JC2C236AA won't scale, while JB2C236AA does. Anyway, once at least one move is used that enables it, IPS will remain for the rest of the combo, unless it's deactivated by another move. Most, if not all, supers will deactivate IPS, though it's not exclusive to supers. Anubis Polnareff's Rekka also deactivates IPS, giving him a relatively easy infinite against most of the cast. Any stand attacks during tandem or custom combo will also have this effect. Just keep in mind that the moves themselves disable IPS, not the tandem activation. And beyond that, some combos will only contain moves that don't enable IPS at all. The best example of this is probably Dio's 2A, 2A, 214A loop. It and all its variants can be done infinitely without risk of IPS, and some of them can be done both mid-screen and in the corner. And though it's debatable whether or not this counts as an infinite, the game having no true reversals also allows a character like Vanilla Ice to loop their unblockable Okizeme and create the same sort of effect. Regardless, once a move has enabled IPS, that's when the second value, the counter, starts to take effect. Each following hit will increase the counter by 1, and once this counter has reached 9 hits, IPS has the potential to activate. Though anytime IPS is disabled, this counter is reset back to 0 until IPS is enabled again, giving you at least 9 hits free from IPS after tandem or custom combo. It's only when this counter reaches 9 hits that the game will start to check for IPS activation, and that's where the RNG value comes into effect. You don't need to know hexadecimal to understand this part, but for those that do, it's a 2-byte value, and for those who don't, just think of it as being 4 digits in length. When IPS is being checked, the last 2 digits are chopped off, and the first 2 are shifted over to take their place. From there, the game will do what's called an AND instruction, where the data is converted into binary and compared against another value. If a digit is 1 in both the data and the comparison value, the resulting digit will be 1. If at least one of the values has 0 in that digit, the resulting digit will be 0. When the IPS counter is less than 17, the RNG value will be compared against 7. When the counter is 17 or more, it'll be compared against 3. After the AND instruction, the game will do one final check. Is the resulting data equal to 0? If so, IPS will activate. If not, it'll check again after every hit until it activates, or the combo ends. If you're having trouble wrapping your head around the AND instruction and the binary, you can just think of this: if the counter is between 9 and 16, IPS will activate if the RNG value is a multiple of 8. If the counter is 17 or more, IPS will activate if the RNG value is a multiple of 4. So what makes the RNG value pseudo-random? Well, this is due to the ways in which that value is altered. The first match on booting the game will always set the value to the same thing, 0x3711. In the context of IPS, once the counter hits 9, this value will be changed with each hit. If you're curious about the specific process, the value's multiplied by 3, increased by 0x3711, and then has the highest digits chopped off until it's 2 bytes or less. Where the value starts becoming pseudo-random is from the game counter. There's a RAM address keeping track of the number of frames the game has been running for, and if the player hits the opponent when this counter is a multiple of 16, the RNG value will change. The variance it creates isn't always massive, but it's enough to make it so that you can never reliably know which hit IPS is going to activate on. Certain characters also took additional measures to vary the RNG value. Shadow Dio's intro, for instance, will change the RNG value once before the start of the round, and other characters like Pet Shop will change the value before the match is fully initialized and the fade to wait is ended. Khan, Pet Shop, Rubber Soul, Shadow Dio, and Young Joseph will all change the RNG value during their character intro. And Anubis Polnareff, Khan, Pet Shop, Polnareff, and Rubber Soul will change it during the initialization of the match. I'd like to bring special attention to Khan and Rubber Soul, however, as not only are they the only characters that do both, but where each character only alters the RNG value once, they do so multiple times. Rubber Soul changes it 6 times before the match initializes and 5 times during his intro, or 11 in total. Khan changes the value 18 times during match initialization and 66 times during his intro, for a total of 84 times. While Rubber Soul, and especially Khan, do have some bizarre quirks with how they handle IPS around start, one can at least rest easy knowing that's the worst the pseudo-random behavior has to offer. Or it would be, if it weren't for Polnareff. If you thought Khan's was stupid, guess what? Polnareff is even worse. Apparently it just wasn't good enough for Capcom to have RNG only change when you hit someone on a multiple of 16. Now it happens just by standing there. Oh, but even better, it's not consistent. RNG can change either 68, 128, or 188 frames from when it did the last time, with it all depending on what the RNG value currently is. But that's not all. Matter of fact, Polnareff's normals will change RNG even before the counter for IPS reaches 9. It even happens on Whiff. If you're fortunate enough to use 2C ever, you've just changed the RNG 3 times. 4 if you hit the opponent when the IPS counter hits 9, and 5 if you also hit them on a multiple of 16. Did you try a jump in and stand on? Well, you better be prepared to have the RNG value change 2 to 5 times depending on which one you used. Did you use S5A? That's 4 more changes to the RNG. S4B? 8 more. And God forbid you even consider using Shooting Star. Once Chariot hits that wall, that's going to change the RNG 4 times every 2 frames. You'd think something like this would apply to more than just Polnareff? Oh, but you'd be mistaken. The brilliant minds at Capcom knew he was the only character at risk of having easily exploitable infinites. Not a single other character has a loopable corner infinite, and especially none of them have one in mid-screen. And don't even think about the idea that 1 or 2 have IPS immune infinites. That's just ludicrous. Hey, maybe if we got another revision, they would have prevented Polnareff from being able to land more than 9 hits in a combo. I sure would have loved to see that. I'm sure Capcom would too. Them and the one brain cell they used to design this stupid-ass game. Nice one, Capcom. Your system sure works great. So, why did I make this video? Just to complain about how my character gets screwed over by a poorly made system? Maybe a little. But I also think it's good and, more importantly, interesting to know how this system works. Whether you're a fighting game designer or just a player of this game. So you can wrap your head around the concept and see where and how it falls flat. And to be honest, I do think there is a bit of an appeal to be found in just laughing at how bad it is. The more I looked into it, the angrier I got. Every single decision feels so arbitrary. I mean, I like to complain, I guess that's pretty important too. But despite the game's many flaws, and this is most definitely one of them, I still really enjoy the game, and even if I wish the system were a bit better implemented, I'm still grateful we have the game at all. Nice job, Capcom. You truly are one of a kind.
JoJo's Dumbass Adventure gets a 4.5.